Hello, everyone. My name is Kent Dahlgren. I wanted to talk about Lucy, the Oracle, and by extension, the exocortex. First, I'll give an introduction. I've been doing software agent design for probably 25 years. I've done it in copier machines, printers. I worked at Xerox. I've done it in the network layer to security products, and worked a lot with predictive analytics, particularly in the context of anti-fraud and authentication. And my interest in BitNation, frankly, is informed on a personal level because I got involved in political advocacy as a teen, advocating for skateboarders who in the United States were ruthlessly criminalized, and most of them were between 9 and 14 years old. So when you would watch, your neighbors running kids into the ground, it was rough. And so, as an adult, I've seen that. I did, about 20-something years of political advocacy and spent 2 years with the Tony Hawk Foundation, and have seen a lot of successes of what happens when you're able to provide services to those who are marginalized. And so what I'm witnessing now is a lot of the same sort of thing to the homeless, to the poor. And so I'm really interested in how we might be able to provide services to those who aren't being served, and particularly when you see a contraction of resources. This is playing out in a very cruel manner, particularly in the U.S. with people who are poor. They have their camps raided and they die at this horrible rate. They don't have health insurance, the whole deal. So, so I do want to talk about Lucy. I do want to talk about the Oracle. I don't want to get into too much detail about the technology. I have another session tomorrow to talk a little bit more about a model that we call ORG, which actually introduces an AI framework I'd like to talk a little bit more about. I can tell you that in the short term, Lucy, as we know it, would be a smart contract written in Solidity, running on Ethereum. And at the basic level, Lucy is really a straight state transition agent, taking the outcome of a particular agreement and distributing reputation, right? But what becomes really interesting is when you begin to think about what happens when the results of those straight transitions are stored into something that we begin to call an exocortex, or a shared memory. So I'll pause for a second and tell a little story. So I was studying TCP/IP in 1986, 1987, and I remember we would spend this time saying, okay, well, if we plug this tube with this tube, are we going to be able to do these things? It was, an exciting thing. The fact is, nobody talks like that anymore. That's just plumbing, right? We have this internet, and so likewise, we're at a very early phase where we talk about the things we could use blockchain for and that sort of thing. What I'm inspired to do is to come up with what I consider applications of the exocortex, which might create incentives for people to adopt BitNation as a solution. And in so doing, we can pick up more citizens. That's how I see things. We have a vast number of people, literally billions of people, who are being underserved by existing solutions. And if we create discrete solutions, which might be delivered in a mobile form, it would create incentives for them to create donations, etc. So these would be what I consider applications of the exocortex. And this becomes, interestingly enough, a more proper way to frame the requirements for Lucy, the Oracle, and the exocortex. So I can give a couple of examples I've been thinking about. For instance, one of the projects that I'm pursuing in Portland, Oregon, it's on the west coast of the US, is a pilot program which would be targeting a relatively small economic area, an economic zone within the city, to provide a mobile application that would enable people who are relying on essentially the black market to go seek work. And so that would be people who are homeless, people who rely on Craigslist or other sorts of things to do. Right now, they don't have equality, they have a trust issue, that sort of thing. We might be able to leverage the BitNation infrastructure to essentially normalize those relationships, whether or not you live in a home or not, develop a reputation score. So there may be a point near-term future where walking through a neighborhood and they would be advertising the availability of their service and their reputation. Have set up I'm looking for somebody with this disability, and that person becomes available, and what I see is the reputation. What I don't see is the color that they're on the cast. And I can enter into an engagement with them, if you will, and at the successful conclusion, the reputation tokens are distributed, and so it continues. it's created a constituency that have shared interests that right now are being divided by whether or not they're homeowners or not. Do you follow? And so these are the sorts of applications that I'm thinking a lot about, because the more of these we create, the more of these programs we can distribute and advertise to get more people to sign up as members of the BitNation. So, basis. So as Lucy process state transitions, and even more importantly, more context around these state transitions, we become state in the exit cortex, right? To create a lot of applications that are fascinating to me. So a really good example is, let's say that I am new to a city and I had aspired, actually we just talked about this last night. A lot of the cities in the US are extremely expensive to live in, but that's where the jobs are. So you might have run out of economic options in one geography, moved to another area, and had that happen, right? And all of a sudden you're not in a home, you're homeless. And it's a perilous place to be. So, you know, I might be an experienced programmer, but I might have also worked on construction as a youth. So I might have to fall back on that in order to not be destitute. So let's say that I have signed up to do construction work, but it's not work I've ever really done before. I've done some of the work, but not all of it. And so let's say that Lucy can leverage within the exocortex a predictive analytic that does a path analysis and says, Kent, you've never built a fence before, but you have done, and based on an assessment, you are, you know, right up front, probably not 100% successful at doing it, but we might be able to provide educational modules along that path in a context basis to help me navigate that. And so a really good example is, you know, I've built a lot of skateboard ramps. I really know my way around building skateboard ramps. And I mean, the truth is, I built a lot of fences too. But let's say that I hadn't actually done all of those. We would be able to deconstruct the subtask associated with the larger activity, do a path analysis, running predictive analytic, identify the deviations. Those would be educational opportunities with an educational module written for each one. So I would be presented with an educational module along that path, and the potential customer would be given incentive for hiring somebody as an educational opportunity. And so then we could set up a lot of really cool applications that create on the fly, on the job, educational opportunities who want to move into those areas, but in a way that is not your traditional educational approach. Those applications become interesting. You can think about medical treatments, for instance, especially when you talk about large samples where I might have had this treatment, I might have had this treatment, I might have had this treatment. You can do a path analysis and say, you know what, this actually ends up having some efficacy. Medical situations that aren't currently being covered by, simply because they just fall below a certain threshold. So there are a lot of interesting applications of that. The third application that I've really been thinking a lot about is, and this actually excites me. I've spent most of my career in large enterprise, and what is utterly missing with large enterprise is the ability to report upon efficacy, ironically enough. You just can't say what constitutes the most effective approach or not. It ends up being highly subjective. But if we enter into an agreement to do a certain project, let's say that we implement this at a project level, say that there's 7 of us in a Scrum team, for instance, and we're deciding that we're going to do this within each one of these. We might capture the context around the decisions on what led into each one of the sprints, and at the outcome do an assessment of what constituted the most effective approach. And within a broad enough sample, we'd be able to report upon efficacy. So a couple of years ago, I worked for a company that was going to deliver an efficacy-based management of information security packages. And what became really interesting is that who was really interested in that was the C-level suite of the Fortune 1000, the executive suite, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Ernst & Young. They love that stuff because what that is a quantitative sample of efficacy at a level where they just can't get it right now. That really resonated for me because it made me step back and realize we're talking about providing government services at almost a civic level, but this actually provides an opportunity for us to develop applications that provide, I guess you could call it governance levels that just don't exist right now in a way that could be wildly disruptive. And again, what I'm trying to do is pull customers, if you will. I'm trying to pull citizens in to expand the number of citizens within BitNation, but I'm trying to target those early adopters, right, to really kick this thing off. So I like the idea of adopting models within Lucy and the exocortex, which might be adopted within, of course I want to hit the marginalized classes, but I also want to hit up here as well. So those are very exciting for me. And I guess I can stop there because there's a lot more about this I want to talk about, but I actually speak about it tomorrow when I talk about the org model. And I can stop and just take questions because I know that there's a lot of shorter term questions about technology and that sort of thing. So
I have a question about the reward mechanism for the for Lucy, how it actually works when being distributed, or the reputational tokens are being distributed after conflicts is successfully finished.
I'm hoping you can hear the questions on the audio. So the question had to do with how are the reputation tokens distributed at the conclusion of an agreement. So again, a lot of these requirements are fairly early in the process. We're still gathering the requirements, and most of what I've got are from the white paper. But some of the stuff that we want to make sure is that we don't have a bias for popularity or unfair. I can think of a lot of scenarios where somebody ends up being an early member of BitNation, having an extraordinarily high reputation score, can associate disproportionate influence on their friends. We have to make sure that that's not. Is that what is part of what we're talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm kind of obsessed about, because these are the sorts of issues of inequity that bother me. And at the basic level, I just assumed that all of those reputation scores were the same, regardless of who you are. Because at first I thought, boy, it would be really great if you could have somebody who's trusted within the community, and then they can associate reputation, and in so doing raise everybody else. But then that immediately becomes suspect for corruption. So it has to be something, I believe, that's just the same, regardless of who you are.
Or could it be fair?
Sorry?
Periodically or something.
The reputation decays over time.
Or yeah, to a certain fraction and then you start getting.
No, I like that. What you're talking about is like almost a fuse. An idea was almost a fuse for reputation. I kind of like that. What I'll talk about tomorrow is I put together with some friends what you could consider a hacker/troll collective, and we aspire to have what we call a pure meritocracy. And it borrows from the domain of skateboarding and surfing that basically says if you don't do it anymore, you never did, right? So it's sort of this idea that you might have built up some score, but it doesn't matter what your score was in 2014. It doesn't matter, right? It's where you are now. So the fuse is not a bad idea. It might be that you've continued to contribute into the culture, and at some point, it just drops back to a baseline.
Yeah, it could be like a moving average. I guess,
right.
Where you drop stuff. It's kind of like election cycles.
No, that's a great idea. I want to make sure I capture that. Are there other questions?
It's not really a question, but it's an exploration. I've been thinking of what I call a frequency or a program called organizing the basics. And somewhere in your story it reminded me of, especially the people who don't have anything. Like I felt like, yeah, let's just organize the basics.
Yeah.
So would you see a potential commonality in executing these kind of programs in using, I don't know, Lucy, or do you see
I do. I spent a lot of time just sitting there. They have these homeless camps in Portland, and I just sit and listen to them. And what there isn't any shortage of is enthusiasm and creativity and excitement to get out there, and they just want a chance. And I was raised, I'm old, I'm 50, and I remember, and my family lived a very long time, so I spent a lot of my time at the feet of my grandparents and their parents. My great grandma Dumas was born in 1881, and all of them were subject to extreme poverty, rural poverty. And so what they would tell us stories about how they were able to, through things. And so what I hear in these camps is the exact same sort of energy and pent-up thing. The fact is they can't actually get to work. They don't have a home or a car. They have a mobile device. In fact, here's an interesting anecdote. Using these predictive analytics in the context of real-time fraud detection, we found that there's a correlation between low battery life and high fraud. But that was no secret to me. It was no mystery to me. A lot of the fraud is going on in the camps. They have nothing to lose. As it turns out, they're pretty good fraudsters. But you've got nothing to lose, right? And so we talk about the phenomena of, nothing to lose means something to hide, right? And so what I see is a pent-up desire to actually achieve some level of self-sufficiency. They want to prove that they have some merit. They're really trying. And the cops will come through and just wash the camp out. They throw everything in the dump. They put the people into an institution. They come out, they've lost everything. And then furious, they seethe, and I don't think people understand how dangerous that is, right? And so really what I want to be able to do is help organize around, let's just use 3 use cases. As it turns out, there's enough overlap between those. It's just a basic thing. I want to clean houses. I want to help fix things around there. They've got some, just give me access to tools. There's 3 people who live in the bushes at the end of this one, there's a train track, there's a highway, and at the end of this road, and they've got themselves hidden with camouflage. And they have, I got some great, I'll be happy to show you. And they build wheeled carts, which are a significantly important contribution to the homeless community because they've got to move things around. And they barter, they operate at a level below the cash level. It's fascinating. So, of course, what I want to do is provide something for them to turn that into some level of equity. It might not even be cash. As it turns out, they're trusted, they're reliable, their location is there, they have good security, and they're providing carts of some reliability to the other members. They're not really looking for money. So these are the sorts of things I really want to help facilitate. And I do believe that we can leverage the BitNation infrastructure in the short term to do that. And I think in a way that could really be adopted in other US cities, because this is happening everywhere. You see it everywhere.
I was living in San Francisco, and it's like exactly that. Super resourceful, but chat.
Yeah. And they're not bums. My grandpa used to talk about during the Great Depression, he left school when he was early, this is prior to World War II, and he would take trains and he would work and then bring money back to the family. And he would talk about the difference between hobos and bums. And the hobos were people who were transitional workers, and they might have been displaced or whatever. Man, these people are really skilled. What we've seen is a massive contraction in the middle class, and there's all these people that are below there, and they're not any different than. That's what's scary, is that they're not, and frankly, their fatality rate is really high. That's what bothers me. That's what drives the anger, the seething anger. So what I see as an opportunity to drop even a not perfect app into there would be something I think they could really jump towards. So, so I see an opportunity to do something in the short term, and then I would love to see the success of that pilot adopted in other cities, if we can. And of course, what I see is an opportunity to bring a lot of citizens in that look a lot like the refugees that initiatives worked with in the past. But what's cool is that there's a lot of skills there. I mean, there's programmers and there's, there's a lot of skills. They're not just day labor bums, right? There's a lot of skill. So,
I have also a small question. I know you're going to talk tomorrow more about just in terms of function, mainly built to distribute the reputation of functions. That is to. Its
primary function is to distribute reputation. There are other functionality, and I was going to put together a presentation, the primary functionality of Lucy, at least at a functional level. What I think I'll do instead is just create a functional specification for Lucy. Right, and so, and in fact, I've got it here, but it's pretty thin, right? So what I need to be able to do is really, speaking with y'all, my constituents, right? I have them gather these requirements, and I'm building a roadmap right now. And in the short term, it's really a Solidity Smart area, and it's just probably collecting reputation as rated by citizens for each other or for contracts and distributing. It's pretty simple. But over time, it becomes more elaborate, and that's where things get really, really interesting. And I would really encourage you. What I've been doing is I pretend that the exercise that gets really fun, because these are short term, and I'm feeding citizens in because I think that'll really help the growth of BitNation. It would be really cool to say, we did a pilot in Q4 2017, 20,000 citizens in within these 3 cities. I want to be able to speak to those because I do think that's going to help BitNation a lot. Whatever.
So as yet, there's no functional specification on, like you talk about the exocortex holding context.
Yeah.
What are examples of that context?
Yeah, exactly. So the question is like, I'm speaking about the exocortex as if it exists, but what would be an exocortex? And so I think at the baseline, it might be as simple as these 2 citizens entered into an agreement to do X. I might want to close the door. The agreement might be, these 2 entities entered into an agreement, this was the conclusion. But over time, I believe that we might want to develop a taxonomy or an ontology of whatever. What was the nature? What was in that? In fact, that's a lot of the work I've been looking into, and I could speak a lot about is like there's a basic format ontology that captures, how do all these ontologies come together, and there might be elaborations of that. that will allow us to categorize. Particularly when you're starting coding this into a basic ontology, is you might be able to find unrelated domains. That's the really cool part. Is there might be somebody who knows how to, that's actually fundamentally related to this, which the exocortex to say, did you know that in terms of aptitude, you might be able to do this over here? So. And so concludes my.
Great.